All right. So, last time, on Wednesday, previously on, we left off talking about the geological record. And we have this at about, did I write 561?
You didn't write numbers.
I did write one number at the very end. And it's I did. Did I just say?
It was 560 or something.
You said
Okay.
561.
Well, I it's 541. I told you that wrong. I know. We refer to all of these. I know. As Precambrian, and then we've got 3 eras here. You don't like era, so we'll do era. Paleozoic. Paleontologists do. Mesozoic. And Cenozoic. Okay, and so what I want to show you are some key events that you need to know where they occur on this geologic clock.
Is this still chapter 25?
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah, I'll let you know when we transition over to 26. 26 is... No, it's way less than 25 in terms of the amount of material that you need to know for the AP exam. Okay. So some key events. Mine too. October 26th. All right. I'm not. Yeah, so... Key events. About 4 billion years ago, Earth forms. Okay? So that would be Precambrian, because everything older than 541 million years is Precambrian. Alright. Right here. Let's put a little star there, and I can write the star over here. And then let's put 2 stars here, and I'll write those off to the side because this is getting crowded. And then 3 stars here. Okay. Alright, you see those stars? Put those on your geologic column. I'm going to write what the stars are over on the side. Can you see the stars? Yes, you can. Happy birthday to Tori and I. Alright. 3.5 billion years ago. First fossils. And these, who discovered those?
The first fossils.
I don't know, but you can. I can take you to a place on Earth where you can dig up one for yourself.
Really? Field trips.
All right. So 3.5 billion years ago, still Precambrian deposits. Your first fossils, and these would be classified as bacteria. All right. First fossils of any living forms, and these are bacteria. Yeah, but it's yes, they are. The individual cells are incredibly small, but bacteria tend to form what are called biofilms, where they aggregate together and they make this material to cement themselves.
So they found like a clump of bacteria.
Yes, they found what are called stromatolites. But anyways,
So it's long tissue, or it just looked like a structure?
it's just really what these fossils are called stromatolites, and you can find places where there are living stromatolites, and it's a bunch of cyanobacteria that make this biofilm that then traps material out of ocean water, and it builds these columns. So there are places where you have like a shallow lagoon, and then you get these columns that look like rock, but they are not rock. They are bacteria. They're living entities. Anyway, so that's what we have fossils of. All right. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. 2.1 billion years ago. First eukaryotic fossils. Eukaryotic fossils.
Can you like put either? Should I start on a new page and just do a big one?
I don't know. That's up to you. They're your notes. All right. Is yours is too small? To put as stars? Yeah, so eukaryotic cells, they have a nucleus. They oftentimes have other membrane-bound organelles.
Mitochondria is a powerhouse.
Mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. You guys, it's all coming back, right? It's all coming back.
It's the only one I know.
Okay. The mitochondria is the only organelle you know?
No, but that's the one I know the best.
Okay. 1.2 billion years ago, first multicellular fossils. Multicellular. What's that?
3.2 bill.
1.2. Okay? So 1.2 billion years ago, first multicellular. First multicellular fossils. Alright, so you see where these stars are located on our geologic column? And then here are the description of those stars. Yeah, Trinity.
So, do you, all of these like look kind of each one like eukaryotic fossils?
Oh, yeah.
They each look different?
Oh, yeah. Certainly.
Like,
From each other?
or like,
Well, so eukaryotic fossils, they are cells. The nucleus is obviously visible. Eukaryotic cells are significantly larger than prokaryotic cells.
Eukaryotic is just one with the nucleus, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Eukaryos means true nucleus. Yeah. Right. Do I know Greek? I know enough Greek to understand science. I mean I can read Greek and pronounce it correctly, but I don't understand the language. I just know the letters and how to pronounce them, but I don't understand the words. Mostly Scotch and Irish.
what is your tattoo say?
Oh, we can talk. We hey, everybody listening to this recording. I do not have a tattoo. No, that's a lie. I do, but we're not talking about it during class. All right. Okay. Shh. Okay. Now we already have another event here about 541 million years ago, and this is what you call the Cambrian Explosion. Yes. Yes. About 541 million years ago, you have what's called the Cambrian Explosion. And this is basically where you get all animal phyla show up. So every animal phylum, and of course you remember your taxonomic ranks, right? Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. But then we'll add domain to that above the level of kingdom. But anyways, during the Cambrian Explosion, all animal phyla show up at that point in the fossil record. Not with their full amount of diversity, right? Because humans, we are just one organism in our phylum, but we don't show up in the fossil record until way up here. Okay? So I'm not saying every single species shows up, but all animal phyla. Alright? Cool?
Cool.
Okay. What do I want to use as a symbol? Here, I'll do this. An X there. 500 million years ago.
Who's not set to scale?
No, but that's because I put, 3.5 billion years into a small section. Okay, 500 million years ago, first land-dwelling forms. Okay, so about 500 million years ago, you start finding land-dwelling organisms, plants and animals. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was gonna ask, how does it work that if all of the animals showed up at 541,
Because-
how's it 41 million years later?
Yeah, because every animal phylum has an aquatic form.
So that we said land
For aquatic
Yeah.
giraffe?
So all of them.
Well, a giraffe is in the same phylum that we are, which is also the same phylum that all of the fishes are. No, not at all. You are a fish.
I'm
So
a
wait, so
fish.
you're
Yes.
saying all of them that grew up in the Cambrian that were aquatic, they were all in the
Yes.
ocean?
Yeah, marine deposits. Yes. Okay. Okay. All right, one last one. Okay, 365. 365 million years ago. First tetrapods. We are tetrapods. Now, is it T-tetr?
Maybe four, well, tetra is four, like, you know.
Yes.
hands.
Okay, so 365 million years, your first tetrapods appear in the fossil record. So tetrapods would be reptiles, birds, amphibians, mammals. Those are tetrapods.
So, like, all the things.
All the things.
Most of the things. That's a lot of things you just listed.
In terms of living species, that's a very, very small fraction
But, like,
of the
what we
total
consider,
diversity.
like, animals.
What we would consider maybe interesting animals.
That was a lot. That was birds, reptiles, mammals.
Yeah.
That's a lot of things.
Yeah.
Big category.
Okay. So remember, I mentioned this on Wednesday. All of these eras can be broken up into periods. Okay? So here's what I want you to do right now. We now are kind of back onto our typical 20 minutes and then a lecture break and then 20 more minutes. So what I want you to do is this, okay? I want you to work with those around you and I want you to try to come up with some of the periods that are in these eras, if you can. Okay? See if you can come up with some of those. Working Renaissance, classical, Baroque. All right? So see if you can come up with some of these periods, and then I will add these in to our geological column. Okay? Take a couple of minutes. Yeah, I'll give you.
Alright. So,
What do you mean by periods?
paleo.
Right. Well, it's not assuming that you understand all of that. Where you're going to see it is going to be in an essay question, and it's going to describe something like the essay questions that I write do, where it describes you a scenario and then it references, one of these periods.
So we are going to
Yes. Yeah. All right. So there's our Paleozoic with the 6 periods. All right. I need to erase this. You all have this written down. These key events. You have it.
Yeah, I have it.
Yeah.
I got it.
All right. So the next era that we need to split into periods. The Mesozoic.
Are we going to talk about what happened in it first? Or no?
What happened? No, I already gave you all the key events that I was going to give you.
Oh, okay, cool.
Now I'm just giving you the periods to fill in. Although I'll give you a series of 5 mass extinction events, so that will actually give you some additional. Yeah, Mark.
I know the periods for the Mesozoic, I think.
You do all 3?
I think there's the classic Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous.
Yes.
Good job, that's hard.
The classic
Triassic,
The classic dinosaurs.
Jurassic,
My childhood is helping me.
and Cretaceous.
I was sweating.
Okay, so those are the 3 periods of the Mesozoic era. Now, most of the charismatic dinosaurs are in this period. Most of your charismatic dinosaurs, like those that appear in the movie Jurassic Park, are actually Cretaceous species. But Cretaceous Park doesn't sound
Wait, those dinosaurs
as nice.
are
Yes. Yeah, nicely done, Mark.
Jurassic?
Jurassic, yeah.
How come the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park are Jurassic? How come the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park are Jurassic?
I don't know. It's a wonderful question. I didn't.
Probably some of them are.
What kind of dinosaurs are Jurassic?
Some of them are, but most of them are Cretaceous forms. I mean, there are other types. So Tyrannosaurus rex is a Cretaceous form, but there are other theropods.
Yeah.
like the Tyrannosaurus rex that are in Jurassic deposits. All right.
Wait, what? Is that a CRE?
CRE? Yes.
It kind of looked like not a C. It looked like a parenthesis.
Is that better?
Why is it circling?
Because that's where most of your charismatic dinosaurs that you would be familiar with
Oh, okay, gotcha.
are mostly Cretaceous forms. All right. So with the Cenozoic, we very rarely use periods to split this, but sometimes we do, and the two periods, bless you,
Oh, there's only 2 periods?
yes, are Paleogene and Neogene. These are periods in the Cenozoic era, Paleogene and the Neogene. It's very rare to split the Cenozoic into periods. Usually it is split into epochs or epochs. Well, yeah, it's within here. So this Neogene includes all the way up to recent deposits. Yeah, Trinity. Yes.
Spelled the same?
Yes.
People are weird,
EPOCH.
Oh.
Okay. So, alright. So these are the periods of the Cenozoic era, but again, we very rarely ever use periods. Instead, we usually use epochs or epochs. And there are
That's a ton.
7.
Oh, no, that's not really a ton.
I already drew on it too.
That's fine.
You could draw another one.
You only drew 2, and then off to the side or down below it, redraw Cenozoic with the 7 epochs.
I draw an arrow 'cause we're
All right. First one. Paleocene. You don't like that?
I mean, my arrow.
These all end in CENE. Paleocene. Eocene. This is fun, right?
Oh, yeah.
The most fun.
Yes, it's cool.
And there's 7, you said?
I did, and there are. Oligocene.
Are we gonna go on
Rob?
field trips?
Can we go to the Natural History Museum?
Miocene.
Keep stalking. He said no.
Post AP exam, we'll do more creative experiences. The AP exam I think is May 13th or May 15th, so we'll only have a couple of weeks. Yeah, it's one of the later tests.
Wait, when did you say it was?
Yeah, like a
It's May 13th or May
Your
15th.
birthday.
It's not my birthday.
Today's his birthday.
No,
Today is my birthday.
May
21st, actually.
Pliocene,
Literally just told you after 29.
Pleistocene, and then finally Holocene. Now these are not to scale. These are not to scale.
Nothing is gonna scale.
I know. So what's the beginning of this? How many million years ago according to conventional geology? 65. So 65 million years up to today is inside of Cenozoic.
Really? Are
Era.
we currently in Holocene?
Yes, we're currently in the Holocene, although some people argue that we should be in what's called the Anthropocene, where we've started to make a significant impact on the geological record. Because you can see evidence of the first nuclear tests in rock, and you can see evidence of the Industrial Revolution, and so a lot of people argue that we should actually create a new epoch. But the thing is, the Holocene's only about 11,000 years. This is like 11,000 years. This is a couple 100,000 years, and then it's millions of years. So the epochs are not equal in their length.
So a lot of things we learn like in modern history, like history and code.
So what are everything that you learn in history is Holocene. Almost. I mean, some of them would be Pleistocene, but almost all of it is Holocene. Emma, then Trinity, then Lydia. Sorry, but I'm gonna work right to left because I read left to right, and so it seems fun to go backwards.
Who named dinosaurs?
Name
Yeah, like who named the dinosaurs?
whoever discovered the fossil. When you discover the fossil, you get to name it.
Okay, what about like zebras and stuff like that? Like who named them?
The common name or the
Oh, yeah,
scientific
like,
name?
Like just who named them?
The common name tends to come from either their function or how they make people, like just what people connect them with.
How they make people feel.
Common names tend to
Zebra.
yeah. Common names tend to be very subjective and not very helpful. The scientific names are again determined by the person who discovers them. Now sometimes you're limited. Equus. The genus is Equus. I don't know what the specific name is. That's a good question.
It's a strike force.
Black and white.
And then there are multiple species of zebra. So yeah. No.
Can they make?
Yes. It seems that all of the members of that genus, including horses, donkeys, wild donkeys, yeah, that they are all capable of mating and forming offspring, but most of the offspring are sterile. Hang on, we gotta go Trinity, Lydia, and then we'll come back over. Trinity.
When does the Cenozoic when would it end? Is it like a time
It hasn't ended. It's still going.
Is there like a time period where like it just stops?
Like when somebody will decide, let's transition to a new era, probably never. It probably will never
Those
end.
have the end, but that one just keeps going.
Yes. Lydia.
Would Adam and Eve be
Pleistocene? So there are a number of variations of what do you do with what do you do with this evidence of geologic record? Some views would be that Adam and Eve were at the beginning of this entire thing. And so Adam and Eve were created basically before even Cambrian deposits, and the beginning of the Cambrian marks like the beginning of a global flood. So Adam and Eve would be pre-Cambrian, but yeah, others would put Adam and Eve as Pleistocene, and then some Christians would argue that there is no historical Adam and Eve, but man, evolved from other hominids, and so there's no historical Adam and Eve.
Because the date we learned the honors file was Adam and Eve were 15,000 years ago. So
That would be Pleistocene. Yep.
So if Adam and Eve are in Pleistocene, then to Christians, it's like nothing that ever else happened
like everything
before.
below that
Like non-existent.
No, but no, that you
Like God created the earth in 7 days, so like, what is the rest?
well, so that it's not literal 7 days.
Seven days to him, but not to
It would be like, I think there's like a way to
Hang on, we've got Katie. Oh yeah.
Like the way to term it is like, it's sort of like, instead of saying 7 days, there are 7 day ages according
Yes.
to old Earth creation.
Yes.
So basically, like all that happened, like basically in like 7 like kind of like the ages thing.
So you have a record of Earth's history that happened, and then Adam and Eve were created separate after a good deal of Earth history had already taken place. Yeah, Katie, and then Emma. Okay, Emma.
Okay, so in bio freshman year we talked about Neom, like 7
Uh-huh.
24-hour
Yes.
periods, but, like, so this is just like not that, like not 7 24-hour periods.
If Adam and Eve weren't created until Pleistocene, and all of this Earth's history happened prior to Adam and Eve being created, then those can't be actual days. Okay? Yeah, Carrie.
if they were actual days.
Then Adam and Eve were created in pre-Cambrian, and then what you have, the typical flood model, the typical idea of a global flood, this is the most common model, is that the flood described in Genesis begins at the Cambrian Explosion. And this is accounting for why do we have basically every phylum of animals show up at virtually the same time in the fossil record with very little description of how you got there, is because you're marking not evolutionary history, but rather the beginning of a global flood. And then the idea is that it ends at either the beginning of the Paleocene or the end of the Paleocene. Okay? That's the most common flood model, is that everything from Cambrian to Paleocene, and maybe including the Paleocene, are flood deposits, were laid down during a single year. So all 6 periods of the Paleozoic era, all 3 periods of the Mesozoic era, and maybe even this first epoch of the Cenozoic era were laid down during a global flood. Yeah, Emma.
So, I remember like earlier you mentioned like aquatic forms of phyla.
Yeah.
So is it because like at one point the earth was completely covered in water?
That would be the only way to explain Cambrian deposits, is that at some point the continents were covered, at least where the fossils were formed, were covered by oceans. And so there's the idea of big intercontinental oceans, or intercontinental seas, or that you have a global flood, and that's why your continents are covered in marine deposits. Carrie.
I'm confused by the flood thing. So if it started in the Cambrian,
Yep.
then it lasted through everything, including the dinosaurs?
Yes. So that it's not then a representation of actual historical events, but it's the order of burial. So all of those organisms were alive at the time that the flood started, and you are seeing a record of the order in which they were buried.
So the flood didn't necessarily last for like thousands of years?
No, it lasted a year. No, the flood. So in 1 year of time, you lay down what conventional geology would describe as about 500 million years. You lay down during a single year. All right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the question was, I'm repeating this so that the recording gets it. The question was, what content do we use to know when one period has ended and another period has began, or one epoch has ended and another one has began? And Trinity proposed environmental differences, and that's an excellent one. And Mark proposed mass extinction. So I want to mark 5 mass extinctions for you. Okay, 5, and it's perfect. It's my whole hand. Okay, okay. So 5 mass extinctions, and I'm going to mark them as numbers 1 through 5. Here is 1. Mass extinction. Okay. Here is 2. Mass extinctions. Here, 3 mass extinctions, and this one is big. This one is really big. About 90% of families disappear.
So would that be because if the flood was a thing? Or?
Wait, there's only 1. 1 S, 2 S's.
Whatever you feel like there should be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the one with the marker, right? It's like when you're president of the United States, you get to make up words that never existed before, and they become part of the dictionary. Okay? There's another one here, 4 mass extinctions, and then finally, number 5 is here. All right? So these are 5 mass extinction events. But again, if what we're looking at here is laid down during a flood, you're not looking at mass extinction events, you're actually looking at one big mass extinction event, and rather a transition in the order in which materials are buried, organisms are buried.
So,
Yeah.
what caused the 90% of animals to disappear?
If this isn't happening during a global flood, would be some kind of a rapid environmental change. And so there are proposals for what might cause that. This one is a little bit easier to figure out what could have been the cause of this, because there's a What? There's a crater. Thank you. Did you say crater?
Critter.
Yeah. There's a crater in Yucatan, Mexico, that the rocks are the right age to be the end of the Cretaceous, and so the idea there is a meteorite struck the Earth, put a bunch of material into the atmosphere that rapidly cooled Earth's climate and led to the extinction of not just most of your dinosaurs, but a lot of your living forms at that time. This one in the Permian, it's a little bit more theoretical. Like, these are the types of things that could cause a rapid environmental shift. You know, massive amounts of volcanic activity, again, throwing a bunch of material up into the atmosphere, causing a rapid environmental change. Tori, you can go now. Carrie.
If like began at the Cambrian,
Yep.
then how did 90% of those disappeared that far away from the beginning of the flood? Because the flood only lasted 1 year, right?
Right. So again, you're looking at if these are all flood deposits, then what you're looking at is an order of environments that are buried during a global flood.
Right.
So the first environments to be buried during a global flood would have included most of the diversity of life present in a pre-flood world.
So why
Would have been buried in the initial.
As it grows across the earth.
Yes, as the well. So the burial isn't just like when did the water show up, right? Because when you actually see even a local flooding event, things can get carried over very long distances,
Yeah.
right? And so what you're looking at is not necessarily where the organisms lived, but where they got buried. And that's true regardless of what your view of what creates the geologic record. You're looking at a record of where they were buried. Sometimes that's going to be where they lived, but in cases even where we have Cenozoic, which almost nobody would interpret as flood deposits, even if they believe a global flood accounted for a lot of this, where you have literally millions of fish fossils buried alongside, a handful of horse fossils. And we're like, obviously the horse did not live in the lake with the fishes, right? And so what you're looking at is where all of these animals got buried, and it's not necessarily where they lived. It's probably where the fishes lived, but it's probably not where the horse lived, because the only aquatic horses we have are seahorses, which aren't horses at all, but are fish.
So there would have been families that like disappeared throughout the Paleozoic thing?
Yes.
Like,
Now there are some entire phyla that don't persist past this boundary. There are some animal phyla that don't persist past this boundary.
Okay, but when you get to the end of the Permian, that's when you can say that 90%
Of families
have like
disappeared.
disappeared
Yep,
since the beginning.
to where we have diversity before this point in the fossil record that disappears, never to be seen again. Yeah, yes. So again, in the context of a global flood, these would represent real organisms that existed in a pre-flood world that were destroyed by the flood and were not represented by a member taken onto the ark that then survived and diversified. Were not replaced. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay, so mass extinction events, we've got all 5. Many ecologists propose that we are in the midst of a 6th mass extinction event.
Of human?
Of a lot, no, not of humans, but of a great amount of the diversity of life as a result of human activity.
So like what?
We are losing a handful or 2 handfuls of amphibian species every year. We're losing lots of insect species every year. So the current estimates are there are anywhere from 4 to 8 million species of insects that have never been described. 4 to 8 million insects that have never been described, that are just waiting for somebody to go and find them, describe them, and name them. But most people think that they are going extinct far more rapidly than we are discovering them, meaning that the only way we're ever going to discover them is if we're lucky enough that they are fossilized. But we already know fossils are biased towards what? Organisms with hard body parts organisms with wide geographic distributions and that persist for long periods of time. Okay? Yeah. So that means most of your species are never going to be fossilized. Which means of all of this diversity that we lost in Earth's history, that is most likely only a small fraction of the actual diversity that existed. In a minute, just relax, Emma.
In order to produce like an animal in the laboratory, do you have to have its like basic compounds? Like,
If you're gonna build an entire animal,
can you do that?
no, we can't do that.
Never mind.
Yeah, not yet.
Okay.
I mean, we can 3D print a plastic animal, and we can 3D print. I mean, you can 3D print biological material. Like you could 3D print a heart. You can 3D print other organs.
That it works?
Yeah, sometimes.
How do you 3D print a heart if it's plastic?
No, you can 3D print with cells, with living cells. You can put. How long does it take? A long time. Yeah, long time. Hours, maybe days. You know, people are 3D printing houses.
Like actual house?
Actual houses. I mean, they're not huge houses, but they're big enough for people to live in. Yeah, there are companies right now that are 3D printing like 800 square foot, one-story houses.
3D printing like the wood, whatever, and like that, and like that. Like they're not actually printing the house. Are they like?
No, they're 3D printing the house using concrete.
Like from the bottom, they go like.
Using concrete and a massive 3D printer.
Are they like the actual house?
Oh, I've seen that. They're like,
No, the entire house. Yeah. I mean, other than like getting in and doing like the fight, like where you've got to get it, you still have to get in and like lay tile and
Electricity.
it's a big 3D printer.
Why would they even have such a
That sounds like such a wild.
it's like a tiny house.
No, because right now, as far as I know, they're building them with concrete, and you don't move them after they're built. So you build them where they're going to be, right? And then you disassemble the 3D printer, move it to another place where you're going to build the house. Sure, yeah,
I
Rick.
was in a class, and I think it was 7th grade. It was like a 3D printing class
Okay.
in middle school, and I 3D printed a phone case and used it for a long time.
Oh my gosh,
Did you?
I printed that.
All right.
Is that on this?
Okay. It is currently 9:03. We are going to take a 3-minute break.
The teacher was super weird.
Just to record again. So when we're talking about the fossil record, what were some of our early events? We had first fossil, right, at about 3.5 billion years ago.
Yeah.
We had first eukaryote at 2.1 billion years ago. And then we have first multicellular form at how long? About 1.2 billion years ago. So what this implies is that you get a transition, prokaryote, and then later you evolve eukaryotic life, and then we evolve multicellular eukaryotic life.
This is still chapter 25, right?
Yes. Yes, it is. Eukaryotic. All right. So then we have a question we need to address. With this arrow, how does this happen? Okay? How do we develop eukaryotic life from prokaryotic life? Right? And then how do we develop multicellular eukaryotic life from eukaryotic life? Because seems to be what is implied by the order in which these organisms appear in the fossil record.
Wait, the bottom one's called multicellular?
Eukaryotic. Oh gosh, I left off an O. There we go. Eukaryotic. I have a student in one of my classes that points out all of the typos in my slides. And they emails them to me.
Actually?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know, to improve the quality of my slides. Alright. So the proposal, no, it's not in this class. The proposal is that we have a mechanism called endosymbiosis. Endosymbiosis. Endosymbiosis to account for how we go from prokaryotic life into eukaryotic life. Okay? We have what's called endosymbiosis. And the idea here, this is the idea. One prokaryote, that was weird, swallowed another. Okay, so one prokaryote swallowed another one, allowed.
What is this? What is
This is endosymbiosis.
No, what are these
Is this still
prokaryotes?
chapter 25?
This is still 25. So prokaryotes, these are cells that lack nuclei,
Okay.
like bacteria, archaeans,
Okay.
and then eukaryotes are cells that have nuclei. We are eukaryotes, but then there are single-celled eukaryotes like yeast and some algal species and diatoms and dinoflagellates. We'll talk about all these different groups of life in a little bit. I think that's actually the next unit we're going into after evolution, which hopefully we'll finish, if not today, very quickly on Tuesday. Yeah, Emma.
If they don't have a nucleus, how do they function?
Oh, I mean, they have simpler cellular structure, but I mean, they still organize their genetic material in DNA. They still have, your central dogma of molecular biology. DNA is written into RNA, which is translated into protein. It's just everything happens within the cell, and it's not packaged away in a nucleus. Okay, so one prokaryote swallowed another, allowed the eaten one to serve it. So it didn't kill it. It swallowed it, but it did not consume it, and instead allowed it to serve it. Yes, exactly like a slave. Serve it by providing energy. Providing energy for it.
Like food.
Not food, because it's still going to eat other food, but it's going to help that prokaryote actually get more energy out of its food. Because the idea here with endosymbiosis, hang on, Trinity. The idea here with endosymbiosis is that this is where the mitochondrion comes from.
Powerhouse of the cell?
Oh, I ran out of space. Let's start over here. Mitochondrion. Oh my gosh, I still ran out of space.
Oh my god, just write smaller.
I can't. You have to be able to read it.
Well, you said it like 5 times.
Mitochondrion. I know, but I have to write it. And you have to write it, because the data seem to indicate that if you hear it, see it, and write it, you will retain it significantly better than if you only do one of the
We'll
three.
see it while we're writing it.
Trinity.
Shoot,
I'm so sorry.
So these are in your body, right? These prokaryotes.
Oh yeah. In terms of number of cells, some people have more prokaryotic cells in their body than they do eukaryotic cells. Although that's not usually the case. But yeah, they're mostly gut bacteria. Bacteria that line your gut and help you to digest properly.
How does one prokaryotic cell follow another, and then having the other one provide energy for it? How is that create a nucleus?
That's a wonderful question. There's no explanation here for where the nucleus comes from. So that's a point that I was going to make, but you picked up on. That's a wonderful thing to pick up on. So this idea of endosymbiosis is meant to explain how we get eukaryotic cells from prokaryotic cells. But it doesn't explain the origin of the nucleus, which is the defining character of eukaryotic cells. Instead, what it does is it explains the origin of the mitochondrion. Well, the idea there is if you can develop mitochondria, you can get more energy out of the food that you eat, and you can add to the sophistication of the cellular plan. So let's say you eat something and you can only get, I don't know, 5% of the amount of energy out of it. But then something radically changes and now you can get 50% of the energy out of it. That gives you a lot more energy to use to build more sophisticated structures. I mean, the nucleus it's surrounded by a membrane that is similar to the membrane that surrounds the cell. So you have material in there that you can use to build the nucleus. But yes, there is a problem here that we're not describing really the origin of eukaryotic cells. Rather, we're describing the origin of mitochondria. Does that make sense? Trinity pointed out something important that I was going to mention. There's also, Michelle.
Can you explain
Mitochondria? We will in a little bit. So save that. We'll talk about cellular structure. Yeah, Emma.
So one of my friends has mitochondria disease.
Okay.
Or function, so
Make too much, too little, or malformed? Too little
yeah, so
mitochondria?
like, how does that happen? Like if it's wrong in one cell, it'll keep multiplying.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, so it was probably the original cell. Because here's what's interesting. So I want to provide you some evidence in favor of this. In terms of how we get from single-celled eukaryotic cells to multicellular, the big thing we need to develop there is cellular communication.
Is this for eukaryotic multicellular?
Yes. Yep. So in order to go from single-celled eukaryotic life to multicellular eukaryotic life, you have to develop cellular communication. Keep that in mind, because we're going to go through a chapter in which we will talk about cellular communication, and you will see how sophisticated that is. It is cool. And it's incredibly sophisticated. And then you'll remember back to this, and you're like, we need to figure out some mechanism by which we develop this incredibly sophisticated thing. Okay? But we're not going to talk about that right now. We're going to talk about endosymbiosis. Okay, I won't erase this yet. Okay. Okay. So still on this topic of endosymbiosis. Okay, still on this topic of endosymbiosis. Coming back over here. All right. True or false? Living cells are surrounded by membranes. True. Okay, so if a cell swallowed another cell and allowed it to live, how many membranes would that swallowed cell have around it? 2, right? Its original membrane plus the membrane from the cell that swallowed it. Look at this. Mitochondria have 2 membranes.
Whoa.
Okay? Mitochondria have 2 membranes. That's what you would expect if you had one prokaryotic cell swallow another prokaryotic cell. And the inner membrane is similar to bacterial membranes.
Does it say inner?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm running out of space. Now can I erase this?
I can know.
This one.
Oh yeah.
The cellular communication.
Is that
Wait, have 2 membrane.
inner membrane is similar to bacteria?
To bacterial membranes.
Wait, what is IMER?
INNER.
Wait,
Inner.
I know those 2 N's are connected. They look like an M.
Immer.
Jimmer?
Sure. Jimmer for that.
Jimmer for dead. There we go. Inner. My dad could not remember Jimmer Fredette's first name for the life of him, so I always called him Booger. Booger Fredette.
I would describe myself as Jimmy Fredette as my basketball career.
Yeah. Okay. So
Trash, but can
the
shoot half
inner
court shots.
membrane is similar to bacterial membranes. Okay? So that's one piece of evidence in support of this. The mitochondria divide like bacteria.
Divide like bacteria?
Yeah, they divide like bacteria do. And remember, a prokaryotic cell, most of these prokaryotic cells are bacteria. There are some that are not. We'll deal with that in a little bit. But most prokaryotes are bacteria. Okay, so mitochondria, again, if one cell phagocytized or ate another cell, you would expect it to have two membranes. The original from the individual and the one from the cell that ate it. Mitochondria have two membranes, and the inner membrane is similar to bacterial membranes. Mitochondria divide like bacteria do, and they divide separate from the cell. Another one. Mitochondria contain their own DNA. Mitochondria contain their own DNA? Yeah.
Is it like the same DNA? Or is
No.
it just like
Completely different than nuclear DNA.
Wait, so is DNA found in the nucleus
And in the mitochondria.
and in the mitochondria?
Yep.
and they're
But they're
different?
different.
Are they,
Yes.
so what is? what
And
is
then
that?
plants have nuclei, mitochondria, and chloroplasts, and all three of those have their own DNA, and they're
so
all
when
different.
it's their own DNA, like what is it? Sorry, I didn't take bio, I don't know.
So mitochondria contain mitochondrial DNA.
Okay.
They contain DNA that codes for mitochondrial proteins.
Okay.
And then the nucleus contains DNA that codes for other cellular proteins. And then mitochondria have what look to be bacterial ribosomes. Ribosomes. Ribo. And again, we'll talk about these organelles when we get into specifics of cellular structure and function. Yeah.
On the AP exam, do they ever have like diagrams you have to draw? Like will they ever
No, but they'll have diagrams you have to look at and interpret.
Oh, okay. So it's like
I mean, it can help you to draw a diagram on one of your essay questions. You know, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words.
So you just draw a picture,
Well, you have to write material as well, but a picture can certainly help you describe something. All right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is that rumor true that if someone if someone dies during the AP test, then everyone passes?
Oh, I doubt it. I have no idea though.
Everyone was saying that.
I was gonna volunteer.
What they would probably do is organize a retake.
Oh.
Would be my guess of what they would do.
Last year during my AP Spanish, everyone was like, "Oh my god, guys, like someone's gonna do it."
When people say that when you get to college too, people always say, "Man, if somebody in your class dies, everybody in the class will get an A." Like I have no idea where these
Someone take
rumors
one for
start.
the team.
Yeah, I can tell you without a doubt, if somebody died in one of my classes, I would not give everybody in the class an A.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Why?
A plus.
Because if you didn't earn an A,
But
you shouldn't get an A.
psychological damage, you gotta listen to that.
Yeah. All right.
I would have gotten an A had I not witnessed
Okay.
someone die.
So
And now I'm too
so what I would do is I would give some students an incomplete and then allow you to finish the work and maintain your A when you were emotionally repaired. All right. Endosymbiosis. Okay? So these again, as Trinity said, this in no way explains where we get the nucleus. Therefore, it leaves kind of some things unexplained about where eukaryotic cells come from, but it does provide evidence that that there's some similarity between mitochondria and bacteria. And so either the mitochondrion began as a bacterial cell, or bacteria began as mitochondria that then became rogue, or they were made with a similar design pattern by the same creator, right? Those are basically your explanations. Because of the similarities between mitochondria and bacteria, you have basically three options, right? Mitochondria used to be bacteria used to be mitochondria, or that they were built on a similar design pattern by the same creator.
This is a lot.
It is a lot. But it's all good stuff. It's all good stuff.
It's interesting to know, like,
All right.
yes.
There are only 2 more concepts from chapter 25. Yeah, Trinity.
So the only way the eukaryotic cell can become multicellular eukaryotic cell is between cellular communication.
Yes, you have
So
to
that-
develop cellular
It sounds
communication.
like, okay guys, so then the outcome, now they're like,
We have to develop some means by which they can communicate, and more in a more sophisticated way than just gather up, right? Because things can send out signals to gather up, but that's not cellular communication. And you'll see this when we talk about it. It requires the cell to actually change its gene expression. The cell has to change what proteins it's making in response to that communication. That's the response. So then, it begs a bigger question, like, what is communication?
so what do you, how do they, like, if they send a signal, then is that still not cellular communication? That's
It's only cellular communication if the signal is absorbed and it causes some response by the hearer or seer, the communicatee. All right? 2 more topics from 25, and then we're done with 25. Okay? One of them, plate tectonics. Plate tectonics. So when you're looking at the geologic column and you're looking at the fossil record, something you have to keep in mind is that there is evidence that at one point all the continents, so here, plate tectonics is the idea that continents are moving. It's a little bit more complicated than that because there are more plates than just continents. But this is a bio class. We are going to restrict our discussion to continents because that's what we can see a lot of evidence. So continents are moving. There is evidence that at one point the continents were combined into one supercontinent known as Pangaea.
Didn't that happen like multiple times though? Like, it wasn't
Well, so it looks like that they started separate, they came together, and then they separated again.
I'm saying, at what point? I'm saying at one point wasn't there like multiple supercontinents?
Yes, well, Pangaea splits into 2
No,
smaller
I'm
supercontinents.
saying like basically before Pangaea there were other supercontinents.
Maybe, but what it looks like is that they were separate, they came together, and then they separated again. Yeah. Alright, so I want to talk to you about some of the evidences of this, of plate tectonics. Oh, yeah, Emma and then Rick. No, you can go first.
So like, is it possible for like land to sink, like all of it, like a continent?
Oh, sure.
Like, does that like do like the water coming over it, like a tsunami or something?
Usually it happens as a process of erosion. Like you just get a rapid amount of erosion happening very rapidly. It happens to islands all the time with tidal waves or some kind of some kind of tectonic activity like an earthquake can sink an entire. It's something the size of
It would just fall into the mantle.
like North America. It could collapse all the way down into the mantle. That's rare for continental plates because they're so much lighter than oceanic plates. But usually it would just go underwater.
And my plates, what do they look like?
Like massive pieces of rock floating on the liquid mantle. Yeah.
Okay, so before they were combined, were they the same as after they were combined?
No.
So they were just random stuff, came together,
Not random
merged
stuff.
together.
But they were similar to what you have afterwards, but there were some differences.
I didn't know if that came together and just came right back apart,
Trinity and then Emma.
I think this is like off of Rick's question, or it's the exact same question, but so they were different environments and then they came together and then became the same environment and then they separated and became something different.
Yeah, well, so the environment that you can support is a factor of where it's located on Earth, right? The closer you get to the equator, the more tropical it's going to be, and that's for most of Earth's history. Also, how far you are from a body of water. So if you lock a continent that used to be entirely surrounded by water in the middle of a bunch of other continents, that's going to change climate. Yes, so yes, the climate is going to change, but it's more than just that. It's the shape and the climate changes throughout this process. Emma.
I have 2 questions. If someone were to fall into an active volcano, Would they die like of the fall, or would they die of like of the fumes? Before they
You would probably pass out from the fumes, and the incredible heat.
Suit Will Smith.
Yeah.
And
All right.
then,
Either way, you're gonna die.
Okay, so you know how you said like there's different environments once Pangea splits up? It's like when it's together, it's all the same environment, like the plants and everything.
Once they
And when Pangea is like,
no, when it's all together. No, on Pangaea there are different.
okay.
Oh yeah. I mean, just like in North America, like we live in a really dry part of North America, but you go to, say, the Pacific Northwest, super wet, completely different climate. Trash. So continents, some evidence for plate tectonics. Continents fit together. So if you take all of the continents and you treat them like puzzle pieces, they actually fit together. Yeah, it's kind of cool. More evidence for this, we see that the continents are actively moving. More evidence for this. Oceans are growing and shrinking. You're like, what is happening here? How is it growing and shrinking? There are places in the ocean where it is growing, and then where the ocean plates hit continents, they're shrinking because they actually bend underneath the continents. Okay? But probably the best evidence for plate tectonics. Hang on, I'll get your comment in just a moment.
Oh, just a question.
Yeah.
So is there like tectonic displacements?
Oh yeah.
And then the fossil like shows up.
Yes, that's what my last piece of evidence is.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Ring of fire.
Well, sure, the Ring of Fire is an evidence for plate tectonics, rapid, just massive geologic activity. But there are fossils overlap where continents fit together. So what I mean by that is if you take South America and Africa and you put them together, they fit together like puzzle pieces. And then when you check the eastern portion of South America and the western portion of Africa, they have similar fossils. Those fossils overlap, suggesting that those continents used to be combined together as a single continent.
So cool.
Yeah, Carrie.
Did Pangaea exist during the flood or?
Yeah, so the idea for the most common flood deposit is Cambrian to Paleocene, is that at the beginning of the flood, the continents are separate. They come together during the flood, right at about, they come together during the Triassic, right at the end of the Paleozoic, beginning of the Triassic, and then they separate out from there. So yes, that would all be taking place during the flood.
So did the flood cause Pangaea or did Pangaea cause?
A lot of flood models suggest that what got the flood started, other than massive amounts of rain, was what's called catastrophic plate tectonics. You call those CPT flood models, catastrophic plate tectonic models, and that's what started the massive geological activity that fueled the flood, was the initial shift in the continents and getting them to move much more rapidly. Michelle.
Is the flood like is the tectonic displacement causes the more ancient animal fossils shows up like?
Right, so the overlap is only in old fossils that are old enough to have been when the two continents were attached.
Oh,
So the overlap, yes, so the overlap only accounts for when those continents are proposed to have been together in the first place. Okay? So the idea is that South America and Africa have been separate for 150 to 200 million years. And so the only time where you're going to have fossil overlap between South America and Africa is going to be in those like 150 to 200 million old deposits and older. Okay? Yeah, you said.
You know how like Europe, would that ever split up? No, right?
Well, so Europe is kind of strange because it's built up of a lot of small plates.
Yeah.
And so, but it seems to be that Europe and Asia and North America were all packaged together, and then South America, Africa, Australia, and Antarctica were all packaged together after they split from Pangaea. So initially, all of the continents were together as Pangaea. Then you had a split into a northern continent called Laurasia and a southern continent called Gondwana. And the northern continent was North America, Europe, and Asia. Europe and Asia never really separated from each other.
Yeah.
And then Gondwana was South America, Africa, Australia, and Antarctica. And Africa split off first, leaving South America, Antarctica, and Australia still attached together. And then they kind of migrate around. And what's interesting is in Australia, almost all the mammals you find are marsupials. The only other places where you find significant living or fossil marsupials are South America and Australia. And those are proposed to have been stuck together for a while, even after they split from Pangaea.
So, but like for example, the U.S. that's never gonna like split or anything.
Well, California is in the process of splitting. California is made up of 3 plates.
Yeah.
The main continental plate, there's a small plate, and then there's a really, really small plate. But the small plate and the big plate are moving in opposite directions
That's the San Andreas.
along the San Andreas fault line. And so California is actually in the process of splitting. No, what's probably going to happen is the small plate is going to end up being forced under the larger plate because of geological activity, and it'll either disappear or break off and spread out away. But we're talking about a long time, probably, unless you had just a massive earthquake, like a 10 magnitude earthquake, or even 12. Yeah.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
So, since Hawaii, like the main island, there's like a bunch of other little islands. Were all
Yes.
those little islands connected to the main island?
No. So the idea with the Hawaiian Islands is they all formed from volcanic activity. There's a hole in the plate there where liquid mantle oozes up and then hardens because it comes up into the ocean water, and so it hardens into solid rock. The mantle is liquid rock, and as it does, it forms these islands. It forms these mountains that when they pop over the ocean level, they form islands. And that plate is actually moving, and so the location of that hole in the mantle is moving as the plate moves away, and so forming more and more islands. But then as the islands separate from that, they're no longer being formed and they're being eroded away. And so that's why Big Island, which is the biggest island, is also the youngest island. The rocks are the youngest, and because it's still actively being built right now. I mean, we've seen that even this year with all of the volcanic activity that's been happening on Big Island. But then the other islands above it, they get progressively smaller as you go up because they're older and they've been eroding away longer.
And then, why are there so many penguins in South Africa? Like, does it have to do with
Well, there are a lot of penguins in South America as well. South America, Africa, and Antarctica.
Penguins and that's so cool.
Oh yeah, a lot of penguins in South
Do they
America.
look different from the penguins that are?
Yeah, some of them. I mean, some of them do, yes. And some of them live in pretty warm climates. Not all penguins are cold climates. Was that it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the end of plate tectonics. There's one more topic from 25 that we have to cover, but we didn't get there yet. So what I want you to do for homework, and I know I didn't write this on the board, read chapter 26. Read chapter 26 in preparation for Tuesday. That will help us get through it faster. So I'm going to write this down. Read chapter 26. Okay, I will put that in our Google Classroom as well. Read chapter 26.